were just recently coming off of psychiatric medications. Many of these cold-blooded killers were on SSRIs, serotonin reuptake inhibitors, proven to increase violent behavior, mania, and suicide among their many disturbing side effects. James Holmes was heavily hooked on the prescription painkiller Vicodin. Side effects include use even at recommended levels, which Holmes likely far exceeded, altered mental states, and unusual thoughts or behavior. Jared Lee Loughner drank alcohol heavily to the point of almost killing himself at one point, according to his high school friends. He also smoked pot excessively and reportedly took hallucinogens such as acid. Since his arrest, the state has involuntarily forced him to take powerful antipsychotic drugs to treat his state-diagnosed schizophrenia. Columbine mass killer Eric Harris was taking Luvox, an SSRI similar to Prozac. Harris and fellow student Dylan Klebold went on a hellish school shooting rampage in 1999, during which they killed 12 students and a teacher and wounded 24 others before turning their guns on themselves. Luvox manufacturer Solvay Pharmaceuticals concedes that during short-term controlled clinical trials, 4% of children and youth taking Luvox, that's 1 in 25, developed mania, a dangerous and violence-prone mental derangement characterized by extreme excitement and delusion. In 2005, 16-year-old Jeff Weiss, living on Minnesota's Red Lake Indian Reservation, shot and killed 9 people and wounded 5 others before killing himself. Weiss had been taking Prozac. 47-year-old Joseph T. Westbecker, just a month after he began taking Prozac in 1989, shot 20 workers at Standard Gravure Corp. In Louisville, Kentucky, killing 9. Prozac maker Eli Lilly later settled a lawsuit brought by its survivors. Kurt Danish, 18, shot his own father to death in 1996, a little more than 2 weeks after starting on Prozac. Danish's description of his own mental-emotional state at the time of the murder is chilling. I didn't realize I did it until after it was done. This might sound weird, but it felt like I had no control of what I was doing. Like I was left there just holding a gun. John Hinckley, age 25, took 4 Valium 2 hours before shooting and almost killing President Ronald Reagan in 1981. In the assassination attempt, Hinckley also wounded Press Secretary James Brady, Secret Service agent Timothy McCarthy, and policeman Thomas Delahanty. Andrea Yates, in one of the most heart-wrenching crimes in modern history, drowned all 5 of her children, aged 7 years down to 6 months, in a bathtub. Insisting in her voices commanded her to kill her children, she'd become increasingly psychotic over the course of several years. At her 2006 murder retrial, after a 2002 guilty verdict was overturned on appeal, Yates's longtime friend Debbie Holmes testified. She asked me if I thought Satan could read her mind, and if I believed in demon possession. And Dr. George Ringholtz, after evaluating Yates for 2 days, recounted an experience she had after the birth of her first child. What she described was feeling a presence. Satan. He added that Yates' delusion at the time of the bathtub murders was not only that she had to kill her children to save them, but that Satan had entered her and that she had to be executed in order to kill Satan. Yates had been taking the antidepressant Effexor. In November 2005, more than 4 years after Yates drowned her children, Effexor manufacturer Wyeth Pharmaceuticals quietly added homicidal ideation to the drug's list of rare adverse events. The Medical Accountability Network, a private nonprofit focused on medical ethics issues, publicly criticized Wyeth, saying Effexor's homicidal ideation risk wasn't well publicized and that Wyeth failed to send letters to doctors or issue warning labels announcing the change. And what exactly does rare mean in the phrase rare adverse events? The FDA defines it as occurring in less than 1 in 1,000 people. But since that same year, 19.2 million prescriptions for Effexor were filed in the U.S. Statistically, that means thousands of Americans might experience homicidal ideation, murderous thoughts, as a direct result of taking just this one brand of antidepressant drug. Effexor is Wyeth's best-selling drug, by the way, which in one recent year brought in over $3 billion in sales, accounting for almost 1/5 of the company's annual revenues. Another instructive case is that of 12-year-old Christopher Pittman, who struggled in court to explain why he murdered his grandparents, who provided the only love and stability he'd ever known in his turbulent life. When I was lying in bed that night, he testified, I couldn't sleep because my voice in my head kept echoing through my mind telling me to kill them. Christopher had been angry with his grandfather, who had disciplined him earlier that day for hurting another student during a fight on the school bus. So later that night, he shot both of his grandparents in the head with a shotgun as they slept, and then burned down their South Carolina home. I got up, got the gun, and I went upstairs and I pulled the trigger, he said. Through the whole thing, it was like watching your favorite TV show. You know what's going to happen, but you can't do anything to stop it. Pittman's lawyers would later argue that the boy had been a victim of involuntary intoxication since his doctors had him taking the antidepressants Paxil and Zoloft just prior to the murders. Paxil's known adverse drug reactions, according to the drug's FDA-approved label, include mania, insomnia, anxiety, agitation, confusion, amnesia, depression, paranoid reaction, psychosis, hostility, delirium, hallucinations, abnormal thinking, depersonalization, and lack of emotion. According to Business Insider, early reports after the Adam Lanza killing at Sandy Hook suggested that he was taking the antipsychotic drug Fanapt. Psychiatric side effects which include restlessness, aggression, hostility, paranoia, delusion, and mania. The New York Daily News has since removed Adam Lanza's association to the drug Fanapt, the originator of the first report coming from Lanza's uncle, who they since believed to have been an imposter. So what drugs exactly were Adam Lanza taking? These are just some of the most well-known cases, and there are countless more examples to research. It appears we have an obvious mental health crisis here in America. But we don't see Obama launching a war against Prozac, Zoloft, Paxil, or Celexa, do we? We don't see a war against the multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical companies and their lobbyists in Washington, D.C., but we do see one against the NRA. Why? A particularly interesting case to look at is the accused murder rampage led by Army Sergeant Robert Bales in Kandahar, Afghanistan on March 11, 2012, that left 16 Afghani civilians dead. According to reports, Bales had been drinking heavily the night before and was taking steroids and Valium. President Obama and the mainstream media didn't blame guns for the tragic killing of 16 innocent civilians in this case, mostly women and children among the dead, by the way. Why not? Is protecting Afghani children from the horrors of premeditated murder not valued as equally as the lives of American children? Why weren't guns the cause of murder in this case, but instead blamed on the mental health of Bales and his obvious insanity? As a reason for the killing, the mainstream media attributed Sergeant Bales' murder rampage on his mental health, not guns. Having recently been deployed for his 4th deployment overseas, Bale's attorneys have suggested that he suffered a traumatic brain injury that may have been caused when he was knocked out by an improvised bomb explosion during one of his former tours in Iraq. One of those attorneys, John Henry Brown, has said that the defense had obtained medical records from Madigan Army Medical Center in Washington State indicating Bales had suffered from a traumatic brain injury in Iraq and post-traumatic stress disorder, but he described those records as incomplete. Did a gun kill 16 Afghani civilians on March 11, 2012? Pile up the dead bodies and set fire to them in an Afghani village? Or did Sergeant Bales? Are prescription medications to blame? Or our guns? Whatever happened to taking personal responsibility for one's own actions? Is it possible that guns had nothing to do with the tragic shooting at Sandy Hook, Aurora, Colorado, Tucson, Arizona, or Kandahar, Afghanistan? Could these mass shootings simply be the result and responsibility of 4 insane madmen? What happens next when the next shooting occurs, the next Sandy Hook, after President Barack Obama enacts his 23 executive orders on weapons of self-defense and they're banned from circulation? Who and what is to blame then? At that point, do all guns need to be banned? All ammunition? What happens when another Timothy McVeigh decides to blow up an American movie theater or grocery store using fertilizer as the primary ingredient? Does Obama launch a war on fertilizer? Or how about a violent group of terrorists hijack planes with box cutters like they did on September 11th? Does Obama launch a war on box cutters? Are fertilizer and box cutters responsible for mass murder? Or are the people using them? If there was a war on anything right now, President Barack Obama would be launching an aggressive war against the multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical companies in the United States, or he would be punishing and reforming Wall Street for gross financial crimes committed in 2008. But instead, he has launched a war against guns, Americans' right to self-defense, and the Second Amendment. Instead of waging war on the true causes of gun violence, like the degeneration of American culture and society, the increase in violent behavior as a result of first-person shooter video games, glorified Hollywood movies, and prescription medications, Obama has decided instead to wage a war on guns. But what happens the next time we have one of these shootings? The next Sandy Hook? After they've already infringed on the Second Amendment and banned all semi-automatic rifles, AK-47s, and magazine clips holding more than 10 rounds. What happens when the next crazed maniac on Prozac walks into a movie theater and murders a dozen people with a handgun or a shotgun? Then what? The government will say in order to save our children and prevent these atrocities in the future, we must get rid of all handguns and all weapons? Will the attack on the Second Amendment ever end? Or is the attack on the Second Amendment Obama's actual agenda? The Second Amendment clearly states that Americans have every right to form a well-regulated militia in order to defend themselves from a tyrannical and oppressive government. So how do Americans form a well-regulated militia without the same weapons, high-powered semi-automatic and automatic weapons that the military, the police, and the government possess? Are Americans supposed to defend themselves with handguns and shotguns while a tyrannical government is firing machine guns at the American people? How will they defend themselves from a potential foreign invasion from an aggressor nation? Most Americans today don't ask themselves these questions, and they trust their government implicitly. They actually think that the president and our elected officials have their best interest and protection at heart.